This week's episode of our show has been sponsored by the Grim Hollow Player's Guide, which is now available on Kickstarter.
Grim Hollow offers a handbook for creating gritty characters in a dark fantasy setting, completely 5th edition compatible.
The book is packed with new character building options, including rules for blood magic spells and all new subclasses for every single 5e class.
Best of all, we are contributing to the book by creating several of the stretch goal subclasses, so the better the campaign does, the more we get to contribute.
We've got some really amazing ideas that we've been working on that we can't wait to share with you. We've got the Madness Domain Cleric, an insane devotee of the Eldritch Old Gods. To check out Grim Hollow and more of the work that we're doing for the book, follow the links in the description below to find the campaign on Kickstarter.
And now, onto this week's episode.
Greetings, my name is Monty Martin.
And I'm Kelly McLaughlin.
And we are the Dungeon Dudes. Welcome to our channel where we cover everything Dungeons & Dragons, including advice for players and guides for Dungeon Masters.
We upload new videos on Tuesdays and Thursdays, so please subscribe to our channel so that you never miss an episode.
Today, by popular request, we are taking a look at Matthew Mercer's Blood Hunter class for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. Created by the Dungeon Master of Critical Role, this unique and new class is as close to official as homebrew gets. It's available on the Dungeon Masters Guild and through D&D Beyond, and in fact it fully is integrated in D&D Beyond, so much so that a lot of people do start to think now it's an official class, even though it isn't quite. So you will have to check with your Dungeon Master if you're considering playing one.
We're going to be taking a look at the various abilities and options presented in the Blood Hunter class, as well as role-playing opportunities, the different subclasses, and some quick builds on the features that we like the most and the way we would build our Blood Hunters for our games of Dungeons & Dragons. There's a lot to discuss today, so let's get rolling.
So in the grand tradition of our class guides, let's start thinking about why we would want to actually play a Blood Hunter in the first place and look at where we can draw on for some role-playing inspiration as we dive into the mechanical features of the class next.
The Blood Hunter is itself a sort of grim, dark hunter, somebody who hunts vampires, witches, or ghosts. They kind of use their evil abilities to hunt evil. We've seen this represented in a lot of pop culture references. Things like Blade is a great example. Even things like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, with that natural vampire slayer attitude coming into this class. And don't forget the granddaddy of them all, Abraham von Helsing, one of the first vampire hunters.
The class also draws a lot of inspiration from the Witcher series and Geralt himself. I think that there's a lot of that imbued in the DNA, literally, of this class. Other characters like Selene from the Underworld series. Or we might even look at the Belmonts from Castlevania. This very big constellation of fantastic fictional heroes that are really core to the genre of swords, sorcery, and fantasy as a whole. I think in many ways, the pulp heroes of Lovecraft stories, like the Dunwich horror, really inspire this very much as well. And we can look to a lot of examples from detective and investigative fiction that are also kind of baked in to what is happening in the Blood Hunter. If you like that grim, dark edge of being a monster, don't stare into the abyss lest the abyss stare into you type of flavor, and you want kind of that darker, more serious bent that maybe you're not getting from another class like the Ranger, I think the Blood Hunter is a perfect ticket for you.
And I do think one of the strengths of this class right off the bat is that it is dripping in this flavor. It has so much going for it in the context of playing that monster fighting monsters. So you can see that in every core ability and every aspect of the subclasses and the core class itself presented here.
It's very similar to the Ranger in many respects, but it differs in the respect that it replaces a focus on nature and the wilderness with a focus on the occult, and rather than having spellcasting baked in, that's associated with one of its subclasses, it does gain some quasi-magical abilities that really make the class, I think, a fantastic damage dealer, whether you are going to go with two-weapon fighting, ranged archery, or even using two-handed weapons. So you can go melee with or ranged with this class, and you can have a little bit of magical support and skill use as well. So I think by pulling that different direction of inspiration that drives it a little bit differently from a ranger, we get actually a really satisfying class to play.
The one detriment to this class is that it is a relatively complex class. There's a lot of different choices that you get to make and a lot of features that include a number of different options and different paths that you can take. So a new player stepping into the shoes of a blood hunter might be a little over-encumbered with the options presented.
Yeah, if you're just coming to Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition for the first time, perhaps even got introduced to D&D from Critical Role and are interested in the class that Matt Mercer created for the game, I would not recommend this class for you as a new player to the game. In fact, this is probably one of the last classes I would recommend playing. As much as you might have liked the adventures of Mollymock in Critical Role, there's a reason why his story ended quite quickly.
If you have a background in other tabletop RPGs, or you read through this class and you can understand and really like what it's offering, then by all means, jump into it. But just be aware that there are some easier classes out there to jump into if it's your first run at Dungeons & Dragons. So let's take a look at some of the core abilities that make up this class.
So when we look at the core features of the Blood Hunter, we start off with a D10 hit die, making it quite robust and martially focused.
It's also going to get Dex and Int saving throw proficiency, which both are pretty useful.
In addition, at 10th level, the Blood Hunter does gain the Dark Augmentation class feature, allowing them to add their intelligence modifier to their strength, dexterity, and constitution saving throws. So this character will actually have some pretty good physical saving throws, although their mental saving throws might not be as good.
You're also going to get proficiency in light armor, medium armor, shields, simple weapons, and martial weapons.
You'll also get to choose your choice of 3 skills from the list that is up on screen right now, as well as you'll gain the additional skill proficiencies from your ancestry or from your background as well.
It should also be noted that your abilities Hunter's Bane and Grimm's Psychometry are going to give you advantage on ability checks for intelligence involving digging up information about the monsters that you hunt or tracking them as well.
Finally, this is a martially focused class, and you will be able to choose a fighting style at level 2, either 2-weapon fighting, great weapon fighting, dueling, or archery, just as they are presented to other classes like the fighter and the ranger. And as well, at 5th level, you will gain the extra attack class feature, allowing you to attack an additional time when you take the attack action on your turn.
So beyond those main features that you're going to get by choosing this class, really the meat of this class are the abilities for Crimson Rite, Blood Maledicts, and Blood Curses. And these 3 elements are really what makes up the whole package that you're going to get as a Blood Hunter.
Combined with the Blood Hunter's subclasses and the optional feats that you can gain, Crimson Rite, Blood Maledict, and the Blood Curses are part of what adds a lot of the complexity to actually playing a Blood Hunter. There's a fair amount of things to be tracking all at the same time once all these features are layered on top of each other. So let's look at in detail how these features work and how we can use them in play.
All of these features are rooted in an element called the Hemocraft die. This is a die that you can roll that allows you to do damage to yourself, removing an amount of hit points equal to the value of the die, but in turn, you get to empower a lot of these abilities and do damage to your foes.
So the basic way that you use this is with your Crimson Rite. Your Crimson Rite allows you to spend a bonus action to touch one of your weapons and empower it using your Hemocraft die. You lose hit points equal to what you roll on your Hemocraft die, but then that weapon deals extra elemental damage anytime you hit with the attack. And its effect lasts until either you stop touching that weapon or you take a short rest.
Your Hemocraft die starts as a D4 and goes up every time that you gain a number in your proficiency bonus, ending up at a D10 at 17th level. The Crimson Rite ability kind of feels like a variation on Hunter's Mark, and you get it just as a class feature rather than having to cast a spell, which is pretty awesome.
A weapon can only be affected by 1 Crimson Rite at a time, but there's actually no limit to the number of weapons that you can have under the effect of the Crimson Rite at a time, although you have to be holding them for the effect to stay in effect. This feature can also be used with melee or ranged weapons equally, so if you want to use this with a longbow or a crossbow or a greatsword or a short sword, whatever it is, however you attack with that weapon, you get to apply this extra damage, and it doesn't require any sort of concentration from you. One of the things that I'll note about this ability is that while it requires a bonus action to activate, there's no reason why you can't do this before combat and just keep the weapon at the ready for your next encounter.
We should also look at the first level ability that you gain, the Blood Maledict, which allows you to invoke a blood curse, and there's a number of different blood curses that you can choose from as you level up. You can use a Hemocraft die, once again damaging yourself, but empowering your blood curse. And from reading through them, there's almost no reason to not amplify these abilities and take that little bit of damage for the awesome output that they have.
When you gain this ability, you can invoke the Maledict once before you need to take a short or long rest to regain it. But at 6th level, you gain an additional use, and you gain an additional use again at level 13 and level 17. So both amplifying your curse and invoking your blood right do cause damage to yourself, but you can heal this back normally, and in practice, I think the benefits outweigh the damage dealt, and I don't think that this carries the risks that one might think they would commensurate with the rewards that they offer. I think you're pretty good to go with most of these abilities and use them, because the limitations on them overall and the number of times you actually have to use them aren't that scary. The effects tend to stay in place for quite some time anyways.
I think when you're looking at a D4 dice, losing 2 hit points on average isn't really going to be that big of a detriment compared to the amount of damage that you get to output and the empower that you get to add to your blood curses.
By mid-levels, when you have extra attack, and if you have some other class feature like Polearm Master or Crossbow Expert or 2-weapon fighting that lets you attack as a bonus action, you can really layer on a lot of extra damage with this ability, and I think the blood curses are another important thing to look at because there's another great source of additional damage here as well.
When looking at the blood curses, we think that some of the best options are the ones that you can use as a reaction, which involve the Curse of Exposure, the Curse of the Eyeless, and the Curse of the Fallen Puppet.
Several other blood curses are invoked using your bonus action, such as the Blood Curse of the Marked, which can be used to deal additional damage with your Crimson Right. However, as the Blood Hunter is a martially focused class, you may find that you're using your bonus action for things like dual wielding, or you may even want to consider taking feats like Crossbow Expert and Polearm Master, which will give you other ways to attack with your bonus action. So the reason why we like the blood curses that rely on your reaction, these give you a completely extra thing that you can do outside of your turn, and the effects of these ones are actually pretty good, particularly the Blood Curse of the Eyeless, which can be used to debuff enemy attack rolls, almost like the College of Lore Bards Cutting Words, which is a great feature and a worthwhile one to consider using to protect your allies.
My favorite is the Blood Curse of Exposure, which actually allows you to nullify resistance and reduce immunity to resistance. So if you run into any foes that you might be having an issue with because of their resistances or immunities, well, this is the Blood Curse that's going to save the day.
And if you are finding yourself going up against dastardly spellcasters quite often, the Blood Curse of the Muddled Mind can impair their ability to concentrate on their spells. This is a very unique effect in the game by giving disadvantage on Constitution saving throws to maintain concentration, and I quite like the uniqueness of this. I also quite like the Blood Curse of Binding, which can reduce a creature's speed to 0 and hold them in place. Great if you need to make a pursuit, although the Brand of Castigation feature helps you pinpoint a creature's location as well. So you might find that the Brand of Castigation also gives you a lot of tools for tracking down a foe that is trying to escape from you too.
So with all that, let's jump into the subclasses available for the Blood Hunter. We have the Ghostslayer, the Lycan, the Mutant, and the Profane Soul.
So the Ghostslayer is specialized in fighting undead, and I think really embodies the classic vampire hunter, despite the name of Ghostslayer. Their Crimson Right actually deals radiant damage and causes the weapon to glow and deal extra damage to all undead creatures, and they get an additional use of their Blood Maledict feature and can target a creature regardless of whether or not they have blood, which is pretty useful considering not many undead creatures have blood anymore. Eventually, they'll actually deal additional damage with their Crimson Right all the time, which I think overall makes this a really comprehensive and straightforward package. If you're going to be in an undead-heavy campaign, this is a great pick.
Next, we have the Order of the Lycan, which allows you to turn into a werewolf-like creature. This is a very tanky sort of option for the subclass and reminiscent of the Barbarian's Rage, where it's going to add bonuses to your melee combat abilities and also make you a little bit more resistant by giving you resistance to non-magical piercing, slashing, and bludgeoning damage. Overall, this subclass allows you to be that frontline fighter and carry a big sword into battle, or whatever you want to do, you can be that front line. The one thing to be careful of is because you are turning into a werewolf, there is a small chance that you might end up going into a frenzy and attacking a fellow party member. So I think the idea with this class is that you turn into a werewolf, charge straight into the enemies, and try to stay away from your other party members just in case until you can transform back.
Yeah, because your Berserk Rage targets the closest creature to you at random if there's several ones. So if you're in the thick of a melee, you're probably still going to beat on an enemy if you get enraged. And the saving throw to resist this is only DC 8. So that is pretty easy to make, especially if you have proficiency in wisdom saving throws because you took the resilient wisdom feat.
Next up, we have the Mutant subclass, which allows you to make a number of different potions and maladies that you can infuse yourself with that have an advantage, but also give you a side effect.
This subclass feels like the hardest one to really grok. The upsides and downsides of all the various mutagens really do look like they have some interesting benefits. Some of these increase one of your ability scores by 3 or 4 at higher levels, which can be a pretty significant bonus, but all of them at the same time carry a drawback of some kind. I think if you have a campaign where you can plan very meticulously so that you can maximize the benefits from these and minimize the downsides, it will be really, really great. But if you're not sure the types of enemies and situations you're going to be facing, you might find that this is a very difficult subclass to make the most of.
This one does feel the most inspired by something like The Witcher, which, if we look at The Witcher games, it is about knowing the monster you're going to go hunt and preparing the right maladies for it. If that's the game you're playing, great. And if you want to play The Witcher, I would love to see some great examples of this class. But reading it, the thing that scares me the most is that I'm going to take one of these mutagens into my body and then get really disappointed with the DM when they do something completely normal, like, oh, I have resistance to slashing damage, but I just got hit with a giant's club and now I'm dead. Might not be my favorite thing in the world.
Yeah, getting a +3 bonus to your dexterity is great, until that disadvantage on wisdom saving throws causes the vampire to dominate you. Finally, we have the Order of the Profane Soul, which in many ways takes its inspiration from the Eldritch Knight or the Arcane Trickster, except instead of focusing on the wizard, it focuses on the warlock. What's really unique about this is that you get warlock spellcasting up to 4th level spells, using the same warlock-style short rest recharge mechanic for your spell slots, and in fact choosing an eldritch otherworldly patron just like a warlock does, except all your spellcasting is based on intelligence instead of charisma to keep the whole class jiving together that much more effectively. This gives you access to some really choice warlock spells like Eldritch Blast and Hex, which I think combo really beautifully with the baseline class features of the class as a whole. I think that getting Hex combined with Crimson Rite is really going to start cooking with gas, even though it's going to take a little bit of setup time to get all of these things rolling. I think it's a really great choice, though.
The great thing about this subclass is that adding magic onto any class is a great feature, and warlocks have some really unique and awesome spells. When we look at some of the prime picks like Eldritch Blast or Hex, it is worth noting that you are a martial class, so you might actually be able to do more damage by just attacking with a bow or your sword rather than using Eldritch Blast, mainly because you don't get the Eldritch invocations that the Warlock gets that allow you to empower your Eldritch Blast. Also, if you are taking Hex, you should note that it will take you a few rounds to get both Crimson Rite and Hex going on the same target, and it might be a better option to just lay in with some attacks rather than doing that. However, there are a lot of other ways that you can go and some great spells to choose from the Warlock spell list regardless.
The Profane Soul will also have a bit of a challenge in deciding how to allocate their ability scores. Do you boost up your intelligence to make your spellcasting better, or do you continue to boost up your dexterity or strength to focus on your martial abilities? And how do you square that against the various feats and other things that you might want to take as well? Thus, I think that I would apply the same philosophy that I do when I play a Eldritch Knight or an Arcane Trickster and focus on the spells that don't really rely on attack rolls and saving throws, like Hex, so that I can get the benefits of those spells without necessarily having to worry about having a good spell attack modifier or a good saving throw DC.
Although it should be noted that a lot of the core abilities of this class do benefit from a good intelligence score, so you do want it to be relatively high.
So on that topic, now that we've looked at all the class features, we've looked at all the subclasses, how would you build your Blood Hunter?
Well, I'm quite partial to werewolves. I think that werewolves are a lot of fun, and so the Path of the Lycan was the one that spoke the most to me. I also really like imagining my Blood Hunter as a melee combatant, a person wielding a big sword, running in and smashing monsters. So my Blood Hunter is going to be the Path of the Lycan. I'm probably going to take Great Weapon Fighting. I might even take a Polearm and do Polearm Master and Great Weapon Master, and just run into combat head first like I would if I was a barbarian, but instead of playing the barbarian, I get to turn into a werewolf and maul my victims to death. And that just sounds really, really fun, and I think the bonuses you get are going to be really cool. I might play something like, I was thinking probably a variant human, although I could see myself being a half-orc or Goliath or something else that's really big, meaty, and willing to stand on the front lines. I want to be a big, bad brute who turns into an even worse and scarier monster.
I mean, both you and I love our feats. We love Crossbow Expert and we love Sharpshooter. And I think that the Blood Hunter is a pretty good candidate for being a Crossbow Expert Sharpshooter. And I would do the variant human. I would take both those feats right away at 1st and 4th level and never look back. And with that, I would be really torn between the Ghostslayer or the Profane Soul. I think the Profane Soul wins out because I want to combo Hex on top of all this. And then basically what I'm going to do is before combat, I'm going to use my Crimson Right on my hand crossbow. I'm going to lay out Hex on the most important target. And I'm just going to go to town and roll all those extra dice on top of my little hand crossbow as I'm making all of those extra attacks with a big +10 boost and the archery fighting style all layered on top of it. I actually think that it probably competes really, really nicely with some of the more prolific range damage dealers like Gloomstalker Rangers and Battlemaster Fighters. I think that it's just kind of masked beneath all these other class features that once you actually pare it down, you're like, oh, this is actually a great ranged damage dealer with some pretty useful other flavor and other non-combat abilities, which I think I can kind of grok the balance of that.
I think if we look at the subclasses that we didn't pick, the Ghostslayer is a very strong choice and probably the most straightforward out of all of them.
Absolutely.
But it just piles on more damage to the already amazing core features presented in this class. The one that I have the hardest time with is the Mutant. Like we said, this is a really high risk, high reward, and I think it very much depends on your relationship with your DM and the campaign setting that you are playing in. The Mutant in its flavor sounds really, really cool, but I have to say that it is my last choice out of the subclasses presented.
The side effects of these mutagens really concern me, and I think unless you know exactly what you want to do with these mutagens and you have a real clear plan of how you're going to combo them together and how you're going to use them, this is the highest risk, lowest reward class. You know, especially compare those mutagens that give you resistance to one damage type but vulnerability to another against the Lycan, which just gets resistance to all of them while they're transformed. And overall, I would say with the whole class of the Blood Hunter, it is a little conservative. I think it could have a little bit more punch and zest to it. I think that it really has a little bit of this fine line between taking downsides in exchange for benefits. It's trying to offer this risk versus reward style gameplay. And I think the risks overall are pretty small, but the rewards are also pretty modest. It just seems like there is an opportunity to really make a misstep and end up dead in front of an ogre mage.
I actually think that when I read this class, we were looking at some of the numbers that you could pull off. And if you build a Blood Hunter right, first of all, I gotta talk about how awesome the flavor of this class is as a whole. And that is a reason enough for me to play any subclass. If the flavor speaks to me, and the Blood Hunter does, there are so many movie characters, book characters, there's so many characters in the world that I strive to want to represent in my D&D games that this speaks to. And if you actually build it properly, you can add a lot of extra dice to your attack rolls. And you can get piled on amounts of dice by taking a few points of damage. And I do think that you can come out swinging and do a lot of damage. Will it be as powerful as some of the other martial classes? Probably not. But if I get to be that vampire hunter or that werewolf or mix in some warlock spellcasting, then you know what? I'm going to be so happy. I think this is a strong class. Maybe not the strongest class, but I think it fits safely in the mid to high range in the worlds of Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. And anybody who is a fan of this sort of theme is going to have a blast playing the Blood Hunter.
Yeah, I think overall the hardest thing that we've seen from our experience was that when we've had players now try out the Blood Hunter a few times, it definitely took them a few instances to get the hang of all the abilities and how everything all works together and how to make the most of it as a damage dealer. So it has this weird learning curve to it that takes a moment, that the interactions don't feel as obvious. And I think for a new player that is worried, oh, I can't take this damage. I can't take this damage, otherwise it'll be a risk. No, take the damage. Use the abilities. The risk is very, very small, especially if you use them outside of combat or in a very calculated way. The blood maledicts in particular, their limited number of uses prevent you from doing so much damage to yourself that you're going to die. Like, it's not like every single time you make an attack, you're going to take damage to deal extra damage. It's only once, and then you get that on every single attack that you're going to be making as long as you're holding that weapon. I think you'll find a lot of satisfying gameplay in the Blood Hunter.
So this has been a look at the Blood Hunter class in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. If you've played a Blood Hunter, tell us about your experience with it in the comments below.
The videos that we create on our channel are made possible thanks to the incredible generosity of our Patreon supporters. If you enjoy the work that we do here on YouTube, please consider becoming a patron of our show by following the links in the description below.
Don't forget to check out our live play Shadows of Drakkenheim, which airs Tuesday nights at 6 p.m. Eastern at twitch.tv/dungeon_dudes. You can find all the previous episodes of that campaign right up over here.
And we have many more class guides for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition right up over here.
Please subscribe to our channel so that you never miss an episode.
Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you next time
in the dungeon.